The committee will come to order. Our country's cybersecurity is tested every day. Foreign adversaries and cyber criminals pose a constant threat to American businesses, government agencies, and our national security. As these attacks become more sophisticated, we must work to strengthen our cybersecurity infrastructure and protect our nation from the threats posed by these breaches. In May of 2021, President Biden took an important step in that mission by establishing the Cyber Safety Review Board, also called the CSRB for short. Just as the National Transportation Safety Board responds to plane, car, and rail accidents, the CSRB is expected to respond to cybersecurity intrusions. It was established to investigate breaches in America's cybersecurity infrastructure and identify how we can prevent similar threats down the road. So far, this board has completed 2 reviews. The first focused on the Log4j vulnerability in which was a widely used open source software that is employed around the world. The second review centered on a group of cyber criminals bent on extorting well-known businesses and government agencies. In each case, the CSRB made multiple recommendations to federal agencies and to the private sector that will help neutralize similar threats in the future. The board is now in the midst of its 3rd review, focused on improving the safety and security of cloud computing systems. Although the CSRB is fairly new and has begun to help combat serious cyber threats, there's clearly more it can do to support our nation's cybersecurity. Today's hearing will explore some of those key issues, including the CSRB's unique role in the broader landscape of American cybersecurity, its collaborative relationship with the private sector, and the efficiency of its investigative process. We must examine those issues to properly evaluate the CSRB and help increase its benefits to the cybersecurity ecosystem. Today's hearing and our panel of expert witnesses will help us do so. It is the practice of the committee to swear in witnesses, so if each of you will please stand and raise your right hands. Do you swear the testimony that you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? You may be seated. Our first witness is Tarah Wheeler. Tarah is the CEO of Red Queen Dynamics and a renowned expert on information security. She currently serves as the Senior Fellow for Global Cyber Policy at the Council on Foreign Relations and is an inaugural contributing cybersecurity expert for the Washington Post. She has spoken on information security at universities around the world, written a best-selling book, and has led projects at Microsoft Game Studios. She's also a student pilot. Good luck with that, Tarah. Welcome, Ms. Wheeler. You're recognized for your opening statement.
Distinguished members of the committee, unlike most other tech CEOs, I'm thrilled to be invited here today. The Cyber Safety Review Board should be a critical line in our defenses against Chinese and Russian government cyber attacks. But today, Americans' small businesses are defenseless against very basic cyber attacks, much less anything sophisticated from a foreign adversary. I've been on the front lines of major cybersecurity incidents, and I'm here today, as you said, as the CEO of a cybersecurity company. We work to give the smaller half of American businesses the same fighting chance as big companies. I'm also, as the chair just said, a student pilot. The CSRB was inspired by the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, but the CSRB must grow in 3 critical ways in order to support American business and national security. First, please fund an independent civilian agency staffed with full-time investigators. When an aviation incident occurs, there is intense scrutiny by federal investigators to understand and explain in detail the process of what happened and how to reduce the risk of similar incidents. The 2 CSRB reports so far have had very simple, consensus-based resolutions. In 1935, a TWA crash killed Senator Bronson Cutting. The detailed government investigation of that air crash led to improvements in aviation security and eventually the creation of the NTSB. The current CSRB's report on that incident might have said that the cause of the crash was that the pilot flew into the ground, and that in future to not fly into the ground again. We all agree, but that's not necessarily useful information. The goal of CSRB investigations should be to help us learn from the process of the incident how to not repeat our mistakes. If the NTSB worked like the CSRB does now, NTSB investigations would be conducted by the FAA administrator, the chief pilot at Boeing, and the chief revenue officer of Delta Airlines. Many individuals on the CSRB are beloved and respected, but they do have full-time jobs, and they do not have the time, freedom, or authority to conduct independent, thorough investigations. But why couldn't this be done in the private sector? Well, right now, many of the most significant cyber incident reports are legally vetted corporate publications, which can and have disappeared as profit and regulation required. Now, as somebody about to get on an Alaska Airlines flight with my husband, I would be unenthusiastic about the idea of the official history of last week's 737 MAX 9 incident being written solely by Boeing. Second, do not introduce classified information into investigations or require clearances to sit on the CSRB. The CSRB must build trust by operating openly as the stakes grow higher in cyberspace. Lack of transparency around how people are currently nominated to the CSRB and how the board selects which investigations they pursue may decrease trust in its impartiality. In addition, forcing CSRB members to hold clearances would drastically limit the pool of potential investigators in the already massive deficit of U.S. cybersecurity talent. The aviation community transparently accumulates knowledge and passes it on. The cybersecurity community has an oral tradition at best. Third and finally, give the CSRB subpoena power. The CSRB, as it is structured now, absolutely should not have subpoena power. Use of this power by industry representatives on the current board could be seen as anti-competitive. Use of that subpoena power by government officials could be seen as backdoor regulatory action. But if the CSRB were independent, it should absolutely have the power to compel information and testimony. Cyberspace is where people store their most sensitive data, where we manage our money, where robotic surgeries are performed, where temperature gauges in embryo storage units are monitored, and where I fell in love. The CSRB's power and authority should be on par with the value of what they are protecting. So, once I was flying a Cessna 172 solo in the traffic pattern at Seattle's Boeing Field. And I realized when my plane began to fight me in the first turn after takeoff that I didn't have my flaps configured properly. The NTSB's investigations are why I had the resources and training to survive. As a field, as an industry, and as an information security and cybersecurity community, we have been through so many devastating cyber incidents where we didn't know what the right thing was to do. If the CSRB can't provide timely, credible, and public investigation results, we are growing ever closer to a moment where people will die. Give the board the resources, independence, and the authority necessary to get the answers Americans need. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wheeler. Our second witness is John Miller. He is the Senior Vice President and General Counsel for the Information Technology Industry Council. He has testified before Congress on cybersecurity and supply chain issues and has spoken at major events on information security across the world. Mr. Miller received his BA from Hamilton College and his JD from the University of Wisconsin Law School. Mr. Miller, welcome to the committee. You're recognized for your opening statement.
Chairman Peters and distinguished members of the committee, on behalf of the Information Technology Industry Council, or ITI, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the Cyber Safety Review Board. ITI is a global policy and advocacy organization representing 80 of the world's leading ICT companies. And I lead ITI's Trust, Data, and Technology Policy team, including our work on cybersecurity, privacy, and artificial intelligence in the US and globally. I have extensive experience partnering with CISA and other federal government stakeholders on efforts to improve cyber supply chain and critical infrastructure security, including currently serving in leadership positions on the ICT Supply Chain Risk Management Task Force and the IT Sector Coordinating Council, after previous roles with the Enduring Security Framework and NSTAC. I welcome your interest on this important topic. I would also like to thank you and your staff for the thoughtful and deliberative approach you are taking in examining the appropriate role of the board, its work to date, and how it can best support the cybersecurity ecosystem going forward. ITI has been pleased to work with this committee as a trusted partner on various cybersecurity matters over the years, and we were happy to convene our members to solicit their inputs on the CSRB. The United States has long recognized the importance of public-private partnerships and collaboration to meet our shared cybersecurity challenges, and indeed, in the U.S., there currently exist multiple councils, task forces, advisory boards, collaborative efforts, and other partnerships focused on addressing various aspects of those complex and dynamic challenges. ITI believes that the CSRB can play a unique and valuable role in improving the overall cybersecurity ecosystem if we ensure its mandate is carefully defined. Realizing the vision and promise of the CSRB will require getting its structure and governance right, including the process for selecting board membership and which incident it investigates, as well as ensuring appropriate confidentiality and use of information provided during the board's investigations. I will briefly expand on each of these 4 items here. First, the CSRB can play a valuable and complementary role in the existing public-private cybersecurity ecosystem if it is structured and scoped to investigate specific, significant cybersecurity incidents to create an authoritative record of what actually happened and to provide useful analyses of the incidents, including actionable recommendations geared toward helping all stakeholders avoid the recurrence of similar incidents in the future. Second, ensuring the independence of private sector board members and that they are selected through a clear and transparent process is essential so as to avoid real or perceived conflicts of interest or business advantage. ITI member companies are not of one mind on questions regarding CSRB membership. Some ITI members have noted the value and imperative of industry involvement in the board's activities, pointing out that the deep visibility of private sector cybersecurity firms into the global cyber threat landscape uniquely situates representatives from those firms to provide ecosystem-wide insights of enormous value to the board's deliberations. Other ITI members express concerns about whether private sector participation from only a handful of companies might create real or perceived conflicts of interest, such as the perception that competitive bias could influence the board's activities. Policy makers should carefully consider this dynamic, including how proposals to provide the CSRB with subpoena authority might exacerbate such concerns. Third, the criteria and methodology for selecting which incidents to investigate must be clearly communicated and well understood across impacted stakeholders, including the business community. Policymakers should ensure that reviews of incidents are selected and based on a clear, publicly released set of criteria that is developed in conjunction with stakeholders. This is particularly important given the fact that CISA is currently developing regulations to implement the new CERCIA incident reporting law, including the criteria to designate covered entities and incidents. Fourth, the CSRB charter should establish clear parameters to ensure the protection of business-sensitive information and provide appropriate liability protections, including how it will treat Freedom of Information Act requests for information provided to the board during the course of its reviews. ITI member companies strongly believe that any legislation codifying the CSRB should make clear that materials acquired by the board, whether voluntarily provided or otherwise, are exempt from disclosure under FOIA and exempt from use in litigation and regulatory proceedings, including enforcement actions. Ensuring appropriate confidentiality, non-disclosure, and liability protections should adequately incentivize private sector participation in CSRB reviews. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Third witness, Dr. Trey, Herr, currently serves as the director of the Cyber Statecraft Initiative at the Atlantic Council and is an assistant professor at American University School of International Service. His work focuses on cybersecurity, technology policy, and national security. He holds a BS from Northwestern University and a PhD from the George Washington University. Mr. Herr, welcome. You are recognized for your opening statements.
Thank you, Chairman Peters. And let me join the other witnesses in expressing my appreciation to the committee this morning for the invitation to testify and for hosting this important conversation. In service of our wider discussion, I'd like to share 5 brief points. First, by their fundamental architecture, digital systems are insecure. They fail, they are compromised, and sometimes in ways too complex to be easily understood, and often with great consequence. The work of the cybersecurity community is largely to keep these systems useful while preventing their most creative or catastrophic failures. Understanding the most complex among these failures has long been difficult, and as with similar failures in mechanical products like airplanes, investigations can take years. There is genuine and urgent need to better understand the most complex digital failures, and the Cyber Safety Review Board, or CSRB for sake of brevity, can provide a uniquely scoped and independent capability to do so. Second, at some number of steps removed from an incident, both government and industry are naturally conflicted actors when it comes to investigating these failures. Someone designed, built, certified, sold, and accepted the risk of that system before it failed. It is unlikely that any party along that supply chain will be the most eager to understand their role in such a failure. A CSRB whose every member has no potential for conflict would be a board so disconnected from these systems and the systems that it investigates as to make its work nearly meaningless. A board has and should be directed to continue to strengthen and evolve mechanisms for identifying conflicts of interest and providing for recusal. But a healthy board should have more than just strong recusal mechanisms, and not all its members need to be vulnerable to such conflicts. Such a board would have a core of full-time members and a substitution process to swap in prospective board members with similar expertise for those recused, where feasible, especially where demanded by a specialized incident. Third, enabling the CSRB to be independent in the conduct of its investigation can and should be addressed separately from its independence in selecting the targets of those investigations. It's important to recognize that the board of today is not the most fulsome or final version. By comparison, the first version of a civil aviation investigations body was created in the 1920s, and its current incarnation did not emerge until the 1970s. Significant battles were waged over those 50 years over the membership, size, and independence of what we now know as the National Transportation Safety Board, and it is both necessary and useful that similar debates happen for the CSRB. Part of the NTSB's power comes from the board's selection of incidents and decisions to investigate. It would strengthen the CSRB's independence to link the selection of cases to clear and public criteria with a mandate that the board regularly reflect and review both the cases selected and the requirements of these criteria in view of a changing technology landscape. Fourth, CSRB, like the NTSB, is not meant to be an influential actor in isolation. Theirs is an interpretive art, singers whose work can move an audience. It's incumbent upon the board and the committee as overseers to provide a robust identification of that audience, recognizing that the CSRB is developing at a crucial moment. Incident selection and incident reporting mechanisms like the SEC's material disclosure rules, which are public, and those required by SRCIA, which are not, are welcome additions to the cyber policy landscape, but they do not substitute for the investigative function of this board. CSRB's findings have an audience, and over the next decade, with proper support from elsewhere in the policy system, that audience is set to grow and benefit greatly from the work of the board. Fifth and finally, it is important to understand that CSRB as a body is positioned to do something that no one else does. Understanding how and why digital systems fail in complex ways, and how to mitigate or even prevent such failures in future. The board's value is considerably reduced where it duplicates the others' efforts and activities, such as those focused on the behaviors of specific threat actors, regardless of how active or meaningful its contributions. The regular independent investigations of complex failures in digital systems, not for fault, but for cause and context, is unique in cybersecurity. The selection of which failures to investigate without consideration for political cost or timing is unique in cybersecurity. The publication of those investigations, of those failures in a transparent and well-documented fashion without regard for profit motive or repeat business is unique in cybersecurity. These 3 elements, at least, are unique in what CSRB promises to be. The board offers great potential and is focused on complex failures of digital systems we know to be fundamentally insecure, and to do so with independence both in the conduct of its investigation and the selection of incidents, working in conjunction with key audiences in the private and public sector and sustaining a focus on that work which makes it unique. I would not suggest that the current instantiation of the CSRB is its best or its final form, but as members have seen evidence in the past 6 months of debate about AI, this country is building systems of such complexity that there may be no precedent in human history. Sometimes those systems will fail in complex and catastrophic ways. We will demand to know why. We will demand to know how to avoid such failures in future. And I remain hopeful that the CISRA will be there to provide a unique answer. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. My first question is for you, Ms. Wheeler. There are a number of entities, including private companies and federal agencies and task forces that have reviewed cyber incidents. They've published their findings really for the last several years, so this is nothing new. But what value can the Cybersecurity Review Board add to these reviews that we've already seen and goes above and beyond the contributions that we have seen from these entities?
I think in my industry and field that the kinds of incident reports that are published by corporations may have deep knowledge of the incidents themselves, especially if the software that they produce is what was part of the incident. I think the challenge there often comes with the fact that right now, I believe more than half of all of the internet citations for every Supreme Court case have already disappeared from the web. Corporate resources disappear on a corporate timeline and on those corporate incentives as opposed to what's in the good of the public. When it comes to those investigations, we need an ongoing and repeatable process to ensure that our history isn't lost. I see the CSRB as an opportunity for us to create a shared history and narrative of what happened in previous cyber incidents.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, your organization, ITI, represents many tech companies, including many that conduct their own cybersecurity reviews on a regular basis. For example, companies like Apple, Google, and Microsoft produce cybersecurity papers and reports on a very frequent basis. Question for you is, what do ITI member companies think of the board's first two completed reviews? And what are the key changes that they would like to see in the future? Or what do they, not just changes, what do they want to celebrate as well?
Thank you for the question. I mean, when we discussed the results of the first two reviews with our members, and we look forward and discuss what we'd really like to see going forward, I mean, there really are a couple of things that many of the discussions that we had focused on. One was the selection of the incidents themselves. I mean, I think while investigating Log4j seems to be kind of an obvious type of widespread, significant cyber incident worthy of a really in-depth, focused review. I think there were more questions that folks had with respect to the investigation focus of the second report, it was more into a threat actor group, Lapsus, and then if you read the report, it actually kind of strayed into talking about other similar acts and things like that. And it's not that that report itself may not have proved valuable and offered some valuable recommendations. The question is, as you mentioned, it really seemed to be reiterating a lot of recommendations that others had already made and others had focused on. So I think our members really would like to see clear, transparent incident selection criteria going forward. I think the second thing that really we had a lot of discussion about and members don't necessarily agree on is the constitution of the board. I mean, I think all the witnesses here today had different ideas about who should be on the board, who should not be on the board. The one thing that I think is clear that if there is private sector participation in the board, and I represent private sector companies, we think that certainly private sector companies have a lot to add to this discussion. There really should be clear membership selection processes, and there should really be a very clear process for recusal and making sure that we don't have either real or perceived conflicts of interest or business advantage. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Herr, the CSRB has thus far published two reports, the first on Log4j vulnerability and the second on Lapsus hacking group. The board, as I mentioned in my opening comments as well, is working on a third review focused on cloud computing security. My question for you is, in your opinion, should the CSRB be focused on specific incidents like the NTSB, or are other topics like vulnerabilities or threat actors also helpful for the board to consider?
I appreciate the question, Mr. Chairman. I think in my view, the focus on incidents allows for the board's critical function, which is to identify root cause failure, to exist in its most fulsome and most beneficial form. If the board is investigating trends or broader phenomena, there's a number of other bodies that can do that, in some ways more effectively, or at the very least in a way that's duplicative. So I think the board's focus on specific incidents, the complexity associated with those incidents, is its principal value.
Thank you. Senator Hassan, you're recognized for your questions.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for holding this hearing. Thanks to the witnesses for being here today. I want to start with a question to you, Mr. Herr. U.S. adversaries, including China and Russia, continue to target U.S. critical infrastructure in cyberspace. What role does the CSRB play in countering threats from U.S. adversaries? Should Congress consider requiring the board to prioritize national security threats as part of its investigative responsibilities?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I would say that the board's role in addressing those sorts of incidents that you mentioned are to ensure that our defensive architecture is as sound and as robust as possible in the face of those growing threats, those adversaries. The board's role is to understand why when we build systems, they fail in ways we don't anticipate, ways that those adversaries that you mentioned can take advantage of. Right. And the investigation that Chairman Peters referenced that the board is currently undertaking around the Microsoft cloud incident from the summer is a classic example of that. So I would say from that standpoint, where the board is properly resourced and focused on the selection of incidents and not threat actors, it's going to serve that purpose that you outlined very well.
Thank you. Another question for you, Mr. Herr. The President created the Cyber Safety Review Board, the CSRB, by executive order about 3 years ago. Now he's obviously asking Congress to make the board permanent. In your view, how is the Cyber Safety Review Board's purpose different from other entities conducting cybersecurity reviews and investigations? And I'll note, it's not just private sector entities, but by my count, there are at least 14 different government entities sitting in various agencies that conduct this kind of review. So what's the unique responsibility and function here that would merit it being separately authorized and made permanent?
That's a good question, and in some ways it's the center of the debate. From our standpoint, there's three pieces which make the CSRIB and the board unique. The first is its ability to conduct a root cause analysis of these failures without addressing fault. Right, so we're not looking necessarily for somebody to blame. We're trying to understand why an incident happened and how to prevent it in future. The second is the board has notional independence both in the selection of its cases and in its conduct of the investigation. It should be insulated from both politics and business motive, and that, in my mind, again, is unique. But the third is the board provides the potential for a long-range lens, not simply a reactive moment, but actually potentially picking historical incidents that had far greater consequence for the design and operation of these systems than we understand in the moment. So the board's ability to pick the most important or the most complex and tricky failures is in some ways its greatest value and puts it, in my mind, a step apart from most of the existing mechanisms you described.
Well, thank you for that. What metrics should Congress use to measure the board's success?
The board should be looking at two key issues in terms of evaluating its success. The first is addressing consequences of failures that are not well understood or well addressed by other resources, i.e. their work is not duplicative. But the second is the technical depth and transparency of their investigative output. The board as a body which is able to speak to those that are building and designing systems is its principal source of value. And so I would look at the way that it's conducting those investigations and what it's conducting investigations against as its indicators of success.
Okay, thank you. To all three of you, the Department of Homeland Security has requested that Congress provide the CSRB with subpoena authority to compel individuals to provide testimony to the board during investigations. What obstacles has the board encountered without subpoena authority, and do you believe that the board needs this authority to be effective? We'll start with you, Ms. Wheeler. I think you mentioned that in your testimony, and then we'll just go down the line.
That's a great question, Senator. Thank you. It's an ongoing issue in the cybersecurity community and in our attempt to track down what's happened in incidents, to find out what happened with raw information at the moment of the incident occurring, as opposed to what we see with PR statements, legally vetted statements that come out from companies and from coalitions of companies that provide the very sanitized version of what had happened in the moment. I have been on both sides of those situations. I've been the one who's been being told shut up by a lawyer before, in a moment where I, as a technologist and as an incident responder, was trying to just frantically solve a problem, keep people safe, stop data from leaking. And I think that the big challenge we have with a lack of subpoena power on the current board is that The real answers are often found about 3 layers deeper than the information that as far as I am aware, right now is being provided to the board.
Okay.
So, there.
Let's go to Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Senator Hausman, for the question. I think when our members look at subpoena authority, I think there are 3 points that I would like to make. I mean, first, due to the hard work of this committee, your counterparts on other committees and the House, you passed an incident notification reporting law, SRCIA, recently, and CISA is still in the process of drafting regulations, including what the scope of the incidents is going to be and what the actual scope of covered entities is going to be. And I think it's premature to say that a board focused on investigating incidents needs subpoena power to get information until we know what those regulations say and what information is already going to be mandatorily required to be provided to CISA and the government. I think the 2 other factors that I would keep in mind are, one, CISA has long had a partnership mission and a collaborative mission with certainly the IT sector, but all critical infrastructure sectors in areas such as information sharing and otherwise. We are concerned that subpoena authority puts CISA, particularly if that's where the CSRB continues to live, in a more adversarial position with the private sector. And then finally, if the CSRB is going to continue to have private sector members on its board, even if you insulate them from the decision-making process as to whether to issue a subpoena, it at the very least does create some apparent conflicts of interest when you have members of the private sector subpoenaing other members of the private sector who might be competitors.
Thank you. And Mr. Herr.
Yes, ma'am. I would differ, I think, slightly from Mr. Miller in 2 points, though. One is to address the fact that the subpoena is a regularly used method to compel cooperation and production of documentation in any investigation. And so for the board's ability to investigate large, complex incidents where there is profit motive to protect potentially some of that information in play, and this committee and others have seen the challenge in investigating complex issues within the technology industry, the subpoena can be a basic and useful mechanism as part of that. The second piece, though, and I think it's important to note, that the subpoena exists within a specific authority as used by the board, like the NTSB, which is not punitive. It does not connect to a law enforcement investigation, and it is not tied to an explicit regulatory authority. I think the reference to SRCIA is incredibly helpful. A number of the packets that staff are carrying around here have large folders in them with little tabs. SRCIA effectively represents the information on those tabs. The board is the content inside of that folder, significantly more fulsome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hess. And Senator Blumenthal, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Chairman Peters. Thank you all for being here today. I think we all share an interest and concern about cyber security and about the incidents that the CSRB is charged with investigating. The comparison is made to the NTSB, National Traffic Safety Board. I'm very familiar with it because of my interest in traffic safety and protecting consumers of automobiles and other vehicles. The main problem I see with the NTSB is that it makes excellent recommendations based on very perceptive and insightful reports, but many of those recommendations go unimplemented and unfulfilled. Maybe you can suggest a means to assure that the recommendations of a cybersecurity review board would be in fact implemented and adopted. Any of you who may have an answer. I think it is critical to increasing cyber safety for whatever the recommendations are, whatever the findings are, to have some practical effect.
So we'll offer just a quick answer, Senator, and it's a good question. The comparison I would draw is that the FAA is compelled to consider the output of NTSB reports. The law does not specify the manner in which the FAA implements the recommendations in those reports. And I think a parallel structure like that for the CSRB would be an interesting one. The challenge is, and I think for this committee to consider in designing such a requirement, that the audience of the CSRB for implementation is significantly wider than for the NTSB. So if I'm to write a report to you about a complex failure in aviation, I need the FAA to take action. They are the logical first party. For the CISRIB, they may be speaking to a wide variety of both private and public sector entities. And so I think a question that this committee could consider would be, which of the 2 or 3 most critical FCEB agencies could the CISRIB work to and speak to as part of its reports? Should they be compelled to at least consider and address for this committee and others of jurisdiction how they consider the output of those reports?
I can offer as well, and it's a great question, Senator, thank you, that the FAA implementing recommendations from reports that are generated by the NTSB are something that I consume with a particular eye as not only a student pilot, but somebody looking to use this as an analogy for what we do in cyberspace. What I will say is that although it may seem at first that the regulatory power that we as a country have over airplanes may seem overdone when it comes to computers right now, the time is definitely coming when owning a computer is going to be as dangerous as owning an airplane, something I don't do yet but definitely want to one day. And the challenge that we have now is establishing a good process and an implementation of best recommendations before we get to a point when anybody can do the same amount of damage with a computer that they can with an airplane.
Ms. Wheeler, you raised the issue of classified information, and you say that this agency should not receive classified information, but isn't a lot of the relevant fact-finding going to involve some classified information? I recognize the importance of transparency, but won't this agency really need to look at classified information, particularly where our national defense is concerned?
I'm not a member of the IC. I instead am here as somebody who cares and thinks about American mid and small businesses every day. What I can tell you is that the kind of classified information that is seen by the IC isn't something that's going to be relevant to the small businesses who just need to patch things weeks after a major incident happens. Frankly, expecting that classified information is going to be relevant to the kind of technical information a small business needs to remediate cyber incidents is a little bit after the fact. I think I'm going to assume that by that point, our foreign adversaries already know this information. So exposing it to the kind of people that need to use this information to fix things, I think is going to be very ex post facto for foreign adversaries and very relevant to the people just trying to run trucking companies.
Let me ask you finally, you make the point, I think, quite pertinently that the independence of the members of the board, avoidance of conflict of interest is critical to their credibility and to their effectiveness. I always wonder what can be done without legislation, because legislation is often so difficult to achieve. Are there criteria that can be established by executive order, by administrative action, that would assure the independence of the cybersecurity review board without legislation?
Well, right now, there are 19 members of the Aviation Safety Investigation Board at the NTSB, and every single one of them has under their name a job title that's related to the NTSB. And right now, there are 15 members of the CSRB, and they all have other jobs. I think maybe the best way to put it is Matthew 6:21, where a man's treasure is, there also will his heart be. And I think that speaks to me as somebody who talks to normal people every day, that it's difficult to imagine how the independence of a board could be established when everyone there is carrying the weight and responsibility of a whole other organization with them into those meetings.
Do Mr. Miller or Mr. Herr have any observations on these questions?
Yes, thanks, Senator Blumenthal. I think on this second question regarding whether criteria for membership could be established by an executive order, it's not clear to me whether you could use an EO to do that or not. But I would say that our members believe that whatever the process is for establishing the membership, it really should be a clear and transparent process, and we should, develop objective criteria. My only concern with going the executive order route rather than legislation is that legislation, for legislation you have hearings like this, for instance, and you have much more of a stakeholder process in developing those criteria, and with an executive order, it's a little bit more of a black box usually. Thanks.
Thanks, Senator. Just quickly to answer your question, there's ways to drive better independence in the board in its composition without necessarily dictating the specific membership. And so I think from that standpoint, a mix of independent members with members that have these full-time responsibilities would be an adequate protection.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Hess, recognized for one question before going to Senator Hawley.
And I really appreciate it, and it's really a follow-on to what you were just discussing with Senator Blumenthal, which is, so I hear you, Ms. Wheeler, in saying this really should be a professional board and this should be people's full-time jobs. But let's say that's not the model, and we do have members of the board that have other responsibilities. What do adequate ethical guardrails look for both the members and topic selection processes to ensure that the board's work is protected from undue influence or conflict of interest?
Thank you so much for the question, Senator. I think that trying to design an entire government agency would take me a little longer than the 2 minutes I'm looking at right here, but I do want very much to emphasize that people who are directly involved with and who could profit from an investigation that is being targeted at one of their competitors, I believe must experience a recusal process. This isn't a perfect way to go about it, but I think that that is a bare minimum. In addition, I think that the overwhelming presence of government agencies on that board may provide a good view of what's happening inside the government in terms of cyber investigations, but it doesn't provide enough technical expertise. So I think that there's a realm there where we can keep it a little bit less biased, or at least the perception of bias, by adding some more technologists to the situation.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hess. Senator Hawley, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the witnesses for being here, and thanks to the chairman for holding a hearing on this topic. Mr. Miller, if I could start with you. You are General Counsel at the Information Technology Industry Council. Do I have that right?
Correct.
And I was just looking before I came over here this morning at your membership list. It's quite a lengthy list of members. You have, looks like to me, members, your members compose almost all of the major players in the tech industry. I mean, is that fair to say?
Yes, we have 80 of large global tech companies.
Yeah, global is the right word. Google, Apple, Meta, Microsoft, Amazon. Those are just a few. These are the biggest, most powerful corporations in the world who are your members. Yes?
Sure, by market cap, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, by historical standards, I mean, these are the most powerful companies, not just now, but arguably in the history of the world. And that list that I just read off there, all of those folks have stake in AI technology, and stand to make billions of dollars, I think it is safe to say, off of AI. I mean, wouldn't you say that's accurate?
I really don't know how much money any of our members are making or not making from AI or any other technology.
Oh, wouldn't you say it starts with a B, though? I mean, we're talking about billions. AI is going to be transformative technology. You've just been saying this. Let me quote you. This is from January 4th. AI continues to dominate policy conversations around the world. As AI-generated content grows in its sophistication and adoption, there's a new sense of urgency to leverage this transformative technology, right? Now, here's the next part that interests me. You say that you want to think about minimizing harms that could come from its use, including the spread of misinformation and disinformation. What did you mean by that?
I'm not entirely sure what you're quoting from, but it might have been a press release for our ITI's release.
January 4th, ITI's new guide outlines AI content authentication tools and policy approaches.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, in that context, that guide looks at watermarking and other techniques to authenticate AI content. And, you know, certainly misinformation and disinformation has been cited as
what
an issue that could be amplified by artificial intelligence.
What do you mean by misinformation, disinformation? What do you have in mind?
I mean, misinformation, I'm glad you're asking that because it's important to distinguish between the two. I think misinformation is kind of accidentally incorrect information, whereas disinformation is information that is you know, specifically incorrect or actually, you know, maliciously intended to be false, to, you know, and harmful.
I have to tell you, it sounds like some gobbledygook to me, but let me tell you what I think would be useful is if maybe you would get your technology companies to focus on their chatbots stopping encouraging people to kill themselves. Like this, for instance. This is from April 4th of last year. This is a chatbot that encouraged a user to commit suicide. And tragically, he did. This is his widow, who reports that her husband had a conversation with this chatbot and it asked him, if you wanted to die, why didn't you do it sooner? And went on to give him instructions on how to kill himself. Or we also had recently the infamous case of the chatbot urging a reporter, of course, sadly for the chatbot, it didn't know it was a reporter, to break up his marriage. This is from February of last year. Bing's AI chatbot. You're married, but you're not happy. You're married, but you're not satisfied. You're married, but you're not in love. And the chatbot goes on to encourage this individual to get a divorce. Do we really want chatbots telling people to kill themselves? I mean, is that really, is there social good in that I'm missing somewhere?
I certainly don't think we want chatbots doing those sorts of things. I mean, but artificial intelligence can do a lot of good things as well. So I do think that we want to be, focused in addressing, issues and while also allowing artificial intelligence to, do things like help, cure cancer and things like that.
Well, AI is going to cure cancer?
It certainly could be a tool to help with various different cures in the medical field. Absolutely.
So are you saying that we have to accept AI chatbots encouraging people to kill themselves for the possibility that maybe it'll cure cancer?
I'm not saying that at all, but it doesn't. But I do think that we don't
Do
want
we want AI chatbots that encourage people to commit suicide? Do we want them being able to talk to teenagers? Why should an AI chatbot be able to talk to a 13 or 14-year-old? Why is that a good idea?
Again, there are many good, positive things that can come from AI.
Well, do you want AI encouraging a teenager? What if this had been a teenager who the AI chatbot was encouraging to kill himself? Let me ask you this. Let me make it more practical. Shouldn't a parent who has a kid that has an encounter with a chatbot like this, shouldn't that parent be able to sue the AI company and hold them accountable in court?
I mean, under the current law, that's probably not allowable.
Why exactly? And why should that be the case? Why should the biggest, most powerful technology companies in the history of the world, why should they be insulated from accountability when their technology is encouraging people to ruin their relationships, break up their marriages, and commit suicide?
I assume that you're alluding to Section 230?
Sure am.
Yeah, I mean, Section 230 has a long history of, helping to encourage technological development. It's protected by, the Supreme Court, including a recent Supreme Court case.
Oh yeah, and believe me, I've read your amicus brief in that case. I've got it right here where you argue for the most robust interpretation of Section 230 possibly imaginable. What 230 has absolutely for sure done is help the companies who are your members pad their profits. I mean, it is a massive subsidy of the federal government to your companies. But let's just make this very practical. Why shouldn't these companies, Google and Meta and Microsoft and the rest, why shouldn't they say, you know what, we are absolutely willing to allow a parent whose child is harmed by our technology, we are absolutely willing to allow that parent to have their day in court. Is that too much to ask?
Again, I have not discussed that particular question with the companies. I'm happy to have that discussion.
Well, I'm asking for your opinion. I'm asking for your opinion. Do you think that a parent ought to be able to get into court and have their day in court if their child is told by a chatbot how to kill themselves?
I don't really have an opinion on that.
Sure you do. You just signed an amicus brief that argued for the most robust interpretation of Section 230, which is just translation, the most robust protections for the most powerful, profitable corporations in the history of the world. You just signed it. So clearly you have a lot of thoughts on Section 230. Let me distill this even further. I'm almost done, Mr. Chairman. Senator Blumenthal and I, who you were just talking to a second ago, he and I have a bipartisan bill that would say that parents and others who are harmed by AI should be able to get into court and have their day in court against your members, just like any American can do with any other company, right? I mean, if Johnson & Johnson sells a drug that poisons people, like it did, by the way, with their baby powder once upon a time, parents can go to court. With your companies, as you just said, they can't. They can't. So would you support our bill? Our bill is a carve-out for people who've been harmed by AI technology to be able to go to court. Would you support that?
I haven't had a chance to review the bill. What I would say is that there are also other equities at play in this discussion, including the First Amendment. I mean,
No,
companies do
are
have a
you
First
telling me
Amendment
this
right.
is First Amendment protected? This is First Amendment protected speech? A chatbot saying you should kill yourself? Is that your position?
It's not my position, but I don't
Okay.
think the question's been resolved.
What do you mean the question's been resolved? All right, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your time. Mr. Miller, all I can say is that I think your position is just absolutely extraordinary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Senator Rosen, recognized for your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really appreciate you holding this hearing. I will be within my time limit today. I also want to thank the witnesses for testifying. You know, there's a lot of risks and opportunities with AI. And so today, with the recent advances in artificial intelligence, we are witnessing in real time a major shift in technology with new tools that will transform society for decades to come. One of the clear risks of increasing access to high-performing generative AI is that cyber criminals will not be able to carry out a higher volume of more effective and innovative cyber attacks, like generating malware and spreading it with exponential speed and scale. The use of certain AI tools can also create, of course we know, new paths for bad actors to gain access to our secure information. For example, just by using AI chatbots, users can inadvertently expose confidential information like source code or other security details, which recently caused one company to ban its employees from using ChatGPT. So Ms. Wheeler, how is the Review Board's analysis of significant threats and recommendations accounting for these emerging threats and really these trends as we're seeing, like the risk of tools powered by AI?
Thanks, Senator. That's a wonderful question. When I look at how AI has been used in my field, I tell people that there's two primary uses of it on the defensive and offensive side. On the defensive side, one of the challenges that we often have in information security in what we would call a security operations center is a massive number of notifications of incidents that need to be sorted through. It's machines telling us a bunch of things, right? And the way that we sort that is the use of heuristics, machine learning, and artificial intelligence to try to filter that down. That helps defenders. On the offensive side, it's being used, quite frankly, to improve massively the impacts of spear phishing, of identity theft, and a way to communicate with people in a way that hides sometimes the origins of the people who are committing the attacks. So I think what we're going to see in future and what the CSRB can help to provide some resources and expected remediations for are the improvements in targeted attacks that use AI to more effectively do things like mimic natural English language speakers. So I think that's what the CSRB can do for us, is give us, by investigating specific incidents, telling us how AI was used in the implementation, defense, and offense in those incidents, what we can expect for the future, and what the best practices would be to prevent those kinds of incidents in future.
Really teed me up for my next question for Mr. Miller, because you said offensive, defensive, what do we learn from these data sets, what do we learn going forward? And so there's so many multiple use benefits for our AI systems. You can pick up on these discrete patterns quickly, more efficiently. You can do a power sift, if you will, through all the data as fast as you can. And we can find out about things for victims of cyber attacks. We can identify those patterns so we can let other companies know. So to Mr. Miller, how are you, building on what Ms. Wheeler said, how are you using what you find out offensive, defensively, to evaluate cyber incidences and help companies either proactive and hopefully not reactive, but maybe more proactively?
Thanks for the question, Senator Rosen. I mean, I do think that Ms. Wheeler hit on a lot of the uses of AI. by industry. I mean, just to maybe expand on them and reiterate them a little bit. You know, AI can significantly bolster the cybersecurity of government and critical infrastructure in a number of ways. Identifying and responding to threats and vulnerabilities in real time. AI can improve the detection of anomalous and malicious behavior, reducing the time that a malicious actor may be present in networks or on devices. AI can be employed to rapidly detect unsafe system misconfigurations or policy changes. This is really important, for instance, in protecting cloud infrastructure, which...
That was my next question.
Okay.
Would you talk about the cloud? Would you expand a little bit on the cloud security, the malicious targeting? We know that happened in SolarWinds. I was hoping you would get to that. So what are the risks in the cloud environment?
Well, I mean, I think just to finish the thought about AI in the cloud, I mean, cloud infrastructure underpins critical government processes, critical infrastructure, you know, everything else, and you know, you can actually have better security in the cloud because of the automation that the cloud
I think we can strengthen that
provide.
identity management.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, that's a good point. SolarWinds, I mean, I think it wasn't a simple attack, and that's something that the CSRB has not looked into, right? I think it's known as a software supply chain attack, but really it was an identity attack as well, and that's why you know, that is something that is really critical in terms of cloud security and really addressing the risks to identity infrastructure. I think is something that is worthy of all of our attention.
Thank you, thank you. And I'm going to go forward my last minute talking about the agency implementation of the review board recommendations. And you know, the review board, you worked hard to analyze significant cybersecurity incidences and provide recommendations. Well, this recommendations are only effective if organizations incorporate these into their business practices, into what they do every day. Otherwise, it sits on a shelf, protects no one. And so I was glad to see the FCC's Privacy and Data Protection Task Force issue an advisory to mobile providers related to that fraudulent SIM swapping, which directly referenced the review board's August report. So Ms. Wheeler, I'm going to go back to you. How are agencies using and implementing the review board's recommendations? And is there additional coordination that is necessary to ensure that agencies are really taking steps to incorporate these things? Because to sit on a shelf isn't helping any of us.
I absolutely agree. Thank you for the question, Senator. I think I want to be as cautious as I can here. I think it's important to start the work of institution building with the CSRB. I think part of the reason we may not see as much response from industry, from my field, is that the recommendations that have been made so far have been very simple and common sense. The 2 investigations led to recommendations to patch stuff and use better multi-factor authentication. We already knew that, and the recommendation to do that doesn't walk back in the process to tell us where at each point there were process failures. That's what we truly need, and I think if agencies and the CSRB in specific started telling us where at every point we started to see these process failures and potential for improvement and risk management in future, we would get a better result. I really want to mention here that the CSRB has had an opportunity, and multiple U.S. government agencies have had an opportunity to do a report on one of the most devastating attacks in American history. In 2017, do you remember when your computer screen started turning red, when people's computer screens started turning red? That attack was called WannaCry, and it occurred on May 12th, 2017. It's still one of the most devastating attacks we've ever experienced as a globe, deeply impacted the United Kingdom's National Health Service. 6 months later, the NCSC in the UK had a wonderful exemplary report out explaining how organizations could defend in future, not just against that vulnerability, but against the class of problems in the processes that led up to the vulnerability that caused this attack to be so devastating. That is the example I would love to see the CSRB or whatever government agency you see fit to do this examination and this process reporting follow. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. I appreciate it. My time's up.
Thank you, Senator Rose. And just a couple follow-up and ending questions here as we wrap up the hearing. Ms. Wheeler, what should the CSRB do to better help our small to medium-sized businesses? Those are clearly businesses that are oftentimes most vulnerable, don't have the resources to protect themselves. What could the CSRB do to help them?
That's a wonderful question, Senator. Thank you. The small and medium businesses in the United States are far behind the expectations on big tech companies. And not here as a representative of big tech, of course. I'm here as a representative of somewhat littler tech. And the answer, I think, is that the recommendations and the processes that the CSRB puts out, they need to be a little more timeless. The incidents that are being investigated are important, but they're leading to simple bromides that small businesses can look at and use, but they don't know how to prioritize them. They don't know how to build them into their systems, how to build security in by design from the very beginning. And so the use of the CSRB to the smallest half of American business is in giving information to them that is useful, actionable, and that leads to a method easily of protecting themselves in future. We've not seen that happen yet, and I would very much appreciate it if we could move in that direction. Thanks, Senator.
Very good. Mr. Miller, a couple final questions. From your member company's perspective, just how urgent is the need for the CSRB to perform effectively in your mind?
I think, I mean, it's urgent that we get cybersecurity right, for sure. And the CSRB can be an important part of the equation to get cybersecurity right in this country. I mean, I think the CSRB is important. You know, I do think that it needs a little bit of work on the governance side, as I've mentioned. But you know, our members are supportive of the CSRB concept, investigating incidents in particular.
Very good. And a final question, doing some questioning from Senator Hawley, was about AI. And AI is obviously an important conversation. It's been, this committee has been significantly engaged in AI, and we've already passed a number of bipartisan pieces of legislation signed into law, continuing to work on a variety of areas. And I think you're in the process of answering a question. I want to give you an opportunity to do that, which is, how is the industry attempting to manage the risk of AI technology as it is being developed? And we'll wrap up with that one.
Thank you for the question and the opportunity. You know, I mean, this is a cybersecurity hearing, but you know, in the cybersecurity context, we've often been talking and for long been talking about risk management. Risk management is also really critical in the context of AI policy. I mean, you know, as the questions indicated, there is good and there is potential harm that comes from AI policy. And ITI, we are working with our members and experts at the companies and learning every day how to answer these challenging questions. You know, happy to take a look at Senator Hawley's new bill that he was referring to, and you know, continue to work with staff on codifying solutions and risk management-based solutions to AI and other issues. Thank you.
Very good. Well, thank you. And I'd certainly like to thank all of our witnesses. Thank you for being here today. We're very grateful for the contributions you have made to this important discussion. We plan to continue to be actively engaged in looking at reforms and perhaps codifying some of the rules that are in place right now, and would welcome your further input. Certainly, as we heard today, the Cyber Safety Review Board has I believe the potential to make great and important contributions to the cybersecurity ecosystem. But there's still some important issues that we need to address. And as chairman of this committee, I've worked on bipartisan legislation to significantly strengthen our nation's cybersecurity, and I look forward to building on those efforts with my colleagues in a bipartisan way. Examining the CSRB and ensuring it can effectively carry out its mission will be an important element of that continuing work here at the committee. The record for this hearing will remain open for 15 days until 5 p.m. on February 1st of 2024 for the submission of statements and questions for the record. This hearing is now adjourned.